I'd like to thank Dave and KPMG for the opportunity to speak today. Today I am going to focus on the dairy industry and I guess the differences between the dairy industry in Ireland and in New Zealand. Some statistics, some general observations, a small look at the lamb sector just by way of comparison, a very short look at Fonterra as an example of what can be done in an industry, what the people in New Zealand have done, an outlook, and then the usual overview of Rabobank. I won't spend too much time on. I think in Ireland, as we all know, we have a big opportunity in dairy in the coming years. I think some of what I will talk about today shows what we might have missed in the past through some of the things that we've been involved in, but how that structure has also helped us to get to the place where we are now. If you look at this, is the I guess the development of the dairy industry in both Ireland and in New Zealand, and as you can see, there's been significant growth in New Zealand. New Zealand have grown over the period from 1977 to 2012 from producing 5.2 billion litres of milk to 19 billion litres of milk. Over the same period, Ireland has grown from 3.2 billion litres to 5.2 billion litres. Now, there's a very obvious reason for that, the milk quota system. And obviously being part of the EU has been of huge benefit to us, and I think has helped us create a significant position within the dairy industry. Obviously, it has held us back to a certain extent as well. And I think the opportunity is now there for us to I guess, increase from that position. If you look at the relative, I suppose, export orientation of the two countries, 90% of what's produced in New Zealand is exported and 85% of what is produced in Ireland is exported, so very, very similar. We believe that Ireland can grow by about 2.6 billion litres post the lifting of quota in 2015. We believe that New Zealand will remain a bit steadier than that, and there are a variety of factors for each of those contentions, I guess, which we will go into a bit later. 2.6 billion litres of growth would equate to an increase in exports for Ireland of about 1.5 billion euros. So obviously there's a big prize for us there. In terms of, I suppose, some of the key milestones in the various the two dairy industries over the last years, if you look at 1984 in both Ireland and in New Zealand. In New Zealand in 1984, the agricultural subsidies system was dismantled. In Ireland, the milk quota regime was imposed. So key dates in both industries. In 1987 in New Zealand, the Dairy Board Act was passed, which removed remaining government control from the industry. Deregulation of milk and dairy products markets in 1992, formation of Fonterra in 2001, which was obviously a very key event in the industry. In Ireland, some other key events in the industry: the listing of Kerry Group in 1996, the listing of Avonmore and Waterford in 1998, Dairygold Foundation in 1990, creation of Glanbia PLC in 1997, acquisition of Golden Vale by Kerry Group in 2001, and the acquisition of Brio by Kerry Group in 2009, and most recently then in 2012 the formation of Glanbia Ingredients Ireland. I guess the two key events, maybe, you could argue, obviously in New Zealand, the formation of Fonterra. In Ireland, you could argue the formation of Glanbia PLC was a key event in the industry. As you can see towards the end, with the sale of Brio and the establishment of GII, you're beginning to see a split in Ireland between the wholesale side and the retail side, if you like, the ownership of brands and the ownership of the primary production assets, which I think is probably a necessary split. And what has this led to in terms of the dairy market? There's a lot of figures here, but I guess key ones really: consolidation and growth in New Zealand. You can see the dairy herd has increased from 2 million to about 4.5 million, and the average herd size has increased from about 100 to about 360. A much different structure to the industry in Ireland. Over the same period, the number of cows in Ireland has fallen from 1.4 million to about 1 million, and the average herd size has increased from about 9 to about 60. So obviously a completely different structure to the industries. This has led to New Zealand having 7.5 billion euros of exports in 2012 from the dairy industry, compared to Ireland's 2.5 billion. And I guess that is emphasized then further in this slide, where we can see the relative strengths of the industry and how much is exported. Ireland's, I guess, in terms of the amount of the industry that's exported, is the second largest in the world, but in terms of being, in terms of absolute exports, it comes in at number 13. So you can see there the relative positions of the various countries. New Zealand way ahead of everybody else, and the USA coming in second. With the lifting of quotas, we believe that Ireland can establish itself within the top 10 in dairy exporting countries around the world. I think that position is well established. 50% growth will put us into that position. In terms of growth in New Zealand, you can see here, if you follow the red line, growth in the industry has been obviously volatile, but quite considerable. Compound annual growth rate of 5% since 1990. It is our forecast that that's going to level off. If you see that growth, 3% of it coming from additional cows and 2% of it coming from additional yield. We believe, and this is backed up by some other statistics, that that the compound annual growth rate for the next couple of years to 2020 is going to be 1.1%. Significant variation in seasons as well, but that's an issue that we're very familiar with here. And trend towards larger herd size and corporate governance structures in farms will continue. I think the larger herd size is going to be a feature of the Irish market, but the corporate governance structures in farms, I think we're some way off that here yet. And some of the constraints I think that we're going to see, that New Zealand is going to see, I guess you could split them into hard constraints, resource limitations, environmental limitations, the higher level of consent required for dairying land use, and the higher production costs embedded in some of the farm systems. In terms of the soft constraints, there is in New Zealand a somewhat negative public opinion of dairy industry. The impact of dairy on rural communities is somewhat mixed, and there is a somewhat stronger resistance to change. So these are some of the factors that are constraining growth in New Zealand. In terms of growth and the possibilities for growth, the OECD has produced some forecasts for growth from 2008 to 2017, which you can see here, 16% growth over that 5-year period. We're about halfway through that at the moment, and I guess we're currently at circa 39,000 tonnes, so right on trend on that growth rate, or 39 million tonnes, I should say. So we're on track to reach the 42.5 million tonnes forecast by the OECD in 2017. And you can drill down into those numbers. You can see that all areas are forecast. Demand in all areas is forecast to grow. So there's a big prize to be won for everybody involved in dairy, and for those who have the correct setup. I think 8.9%, 9% growth, close to 10% growth over the next 4 years. I think the industry in Ireland, the structure of the industry in Ireland is such that we should be able to take our part of that. And I think if you look at the industry in Ireland, drilling down again into some of the numbers there, the number of dairy cows, as you can see there, falling from 1.4 million to 1.1 million in 2010, and the average herd size going from roughly 10 to roughly 60. But the efficiency within the industry has increased significantly, 3.6 million litres, or 3.6 billion litres, to 5.1 billion litres, and 2,600 litres per cow, increasing to 4,600 litres per cow. So a significant increase in the industry in Ireland. So I think at farming level, we have certainly the capacity, both in terms of the physical resources, but also in terms of the abilities, the farming abilities, to be able to take advantage of growth opportunities in the market. The big question, I suppose, then is do we have the capacity to process that? Obviously, there's been a lot of developments in that sector as well. And if you look at this slide, I think, comparing Ireland to the Netherlands, Denmark, and New Zealand, who I guess we would traditionally see as our largest competitors in terms of export dairy product. In 2000, the Netherlands had two major players accounting for over 80% of processing, and they now have one. In Denmark, there was one processor accounting for over 80% in 2000, still one. And in New Zealand, there was two processors again, and now there is one. In Ireland, we had 6 processors in 2000, and we have 6 processors now. What can be read from that? Do we need an Irish Arla? Do we need an Irish Frontera? I think the structure of the industry is somewhat different in Ireland. There is a level of co-opetition which probably doesn't exist in other markets. And also we've got the Irish Dairy Board as an umbrella body. So I think there is some differences which alleviate to some degree the inefficiencies of having so many processors. But I think the question is still open as to whether it is necessary for us to have one large processor like in our 3 major competitor countries. As Ian said, I think there are a number of issues on this. I think the expression he used was gumboot politics, which I think is a nice expression. But yeah, I mean, there's some issues there, but I guess the fundamental questions are also, is it something that is necessary? Do we need that? Are the cost efficiencies that would be achieved and the, I guess, marketing clout that could be achieved by something like that sufficient to make up for the necessary changes that would be needed? By way of comparison, I have produced just some very short detail on the lamb industry. The lamb sector in Ireland and in New Zealand, if you look at the relative size of those industries, obviously New Zealand is way ahead, $2.3 billion compared to $180 million, completely different size of industry, 31.2 million size of flock in New Zealand compared to a flock of about 5 million in Ireland. But I think there are a lot of comparators between the two industries. I think both industries have managed to create niche product, and I think it is seen that both Irish lamb and New Zealand lamb are recognized as a sort of a luxury brand, if you like, in the industry. So, the ability is there to create that. I think Ireland has done a good job in marketing itself as a sustainable food and agri source. And I think obviously New Zealand has done a lot of work in that area as well. I think the lessons from here for Irish dairy, well, I think the success of creating an Irish lamb brand can be, I guess, learned in the dairy industry as well. We can import that success, if you like, into the dairy industry. I just wanted to very quickly touch on the creation of Fonterra and what that has done to the industry in New Zealand. If you look there, some key figures. I guess really most important, I suppose, is the size of the company. Looking at 20 billion of sales, we're a long way off that in any one industry in Ireland. Is that a good thing? Do we need something like this? I guess if you look at where Fonterra's sales go, 10% to New Zealand, and that's the 90% export figure. Obviously very successful, products sold in over 100 countries, and now beginning to process outside of New Zealand in a fairly big way. 2.3 billion litres produced or processed offshore, almost half the size of the industry in Ireland processed by Fonterra offshore. Obviously a company that's very strategic to New Zealand, and I suppose there are some attendant risks in that. I mean, you can see here where the creation of Fonterra in 2001 stimulated growth in the number of cows and milk by 35%, and milk production by 138%. Now, there are many factors influencing that growth, but certainly the creation of Fonterra has to have had a very significant impact on that level of growth. Again, the question, is that structure, is a company of that structure appropriate for Ireland? I suppose some of the lessons learned. How was Fonterra created? Well, governmental support for free trade versus milk quota, and adjusting the competition laws to facilitate a consolidator. I think it was very important that the government was behind that creation. But obviously, it was seen as very fundamental to the economics of the country. And why did the farmers accept the merger? Why was this seen as a good thing at grassroots level, if you like? Well, I mean, there was significant leadership within the industry which was able to push through the creation and was able to explain the benefits of that creation. And the export orientation of the industry, it was felt that export orientation needed one strong player to compete globally. I guess the downside risk of that is that there is, I suppose, a threat, if you like, in having a company of that size so big and so key to the industry. I suppose, you know, for Ireland, we would have a greater management of the control of the expected increase. We would have greater management of greater control over the image, the marketing image, if you like, of Irish dairy. But again, you know, you do have some downside risk there as well. In terms of outlook for the dairy industry, Altera have produced some statistics as to where in Europe it would be most appropriate for dairy to expand. And basically what they're saying is where forage can be best grown is the best place for dairy to expand. And if you look at the darkest green areas here, that's where they expect the most dairy increase. So obviously Ireland has a very big opportunity there, the Netherlands as well, and to some extent the UK. In terms of where they expect that growth to come out, they see Ireland growing significantly, almost 40%. And the other large EU dairy countries expanding as well. The label has fallen off here, but this is the UK. A big, obviously, a big dairy industry in itself, but it is expected that over that period, the industry in the UK is going to shrink. So, you know, the opportunity for Ireland is I think, well underlined by these figures. In terms of, I guess, other factors within the dairy sector, seasonality, as in New Zealand, remains a challenge. How do we increase production at the shoulders? How do we become more efficient, a more efficient producer? Input costs are rising. I think, there should be a favourable. We should have a favourable cost base because of the amount of forage that we have here, the ability to feed our herd off grass. But other costs and other factors such as energy, is I suppose creating upward cost pressure. The beef sector is a challenge for the future. There is an interrelationship there with the dairy sector. I think the good news is that the investment on the processing sector is well underway, as most of us in this room will be familiar with. I think that has been certainly on the large scale investment needed at the processing level. That has been very successful over the last number of years. I think the key question is whether the investment that is needed at farm level is, first of all, available, and I guess second of all, are the farmers willing to make that investment? I think the answer to those questions is yes. I think the new and expanded processing capacity is more than capable of covering the expected processing increase. But in general, it is seen internationally, I think, that the fragmented nature of the sector is a structural weakness in a global context, despite the levels of competition and the existence of the Irish Dairy Board. In general, I think the F&A sector in Ireland, the macro drivers are very strong. In the number of people, and as Ian has alluded to, the number of middle class people. Again, another definition here, World Bank definition, incomes above $16,000 a year, to increase to 2.1 billion by 2030 from 352 million in 2000. So, a significant increase in fundamental demand growth there. Irish food and drink exports have been increasing, reached 9.3 billion in 2012, on track to increase again in 2013. The food harvest targets are largely on track. The dairy expansion target of 50% seen by some to be somewhat aggressive, but in general, it is expected that will come out at 30 to 40% at a minimum. So, there is definitely a lot of support for those numbers. And as Ian has alluded to as well, there are always a number of shocks in the industry, weather shocks, health shocks. Even if you look at the horse meat scandal recently. But I think in Ireland we're well able to deal with those, and we have had a very keen focus on the consumer, which has helped us through some of those things. So that's really the end of the major part of my presentation. I just wanted to give a brief overview of Rabobank. Unfortunately, there isn't a fast forward button on this part of the presentation as there is in YouTube, but I won't be too long, I promise. As you probably all know, Rabobank is a major international bank, 10 million clients worldwide, 730 billion of assets, a number of different brands that we use both in the Netherlands and in international locations. Obviously, we made some announcements recently about ACC in terms of giving back the banking license and closing down the ACC network, but we will continue to focus on banking to the agri sector within the Rabobank stable, and are currently working on a number of structures to I guess, provide capital to farmers, particularly in the dairy sector, but in all sectors in general, to allow expansion to happen. Just in terms of our global footprint, as you can see, we're very large where food and agri is large, 1,100 offices, over 43 countries, 60,000 staff. So, it is a global business. We understand the industry very well, and that's backed up by our food and agri research team, which again, 80 researchers in 19 offices. The output mainly in the form of industry notes, reviews, and commodity notes, world maps and tailored presentations. A lot of you in this room will be familiar with their work. So that's all I have. Thank you very much for listening.